Hello, Journey West County. In this series, we've been looking at identity. And in the last video, we looked at the identity of being a child of God. I just want to again say, being a child of God is really so important to who we are. It's what we were meant to always be. When Adam and Eve left the garden and they sinned against God, what that really meant was, what sin means is turning our backs on being the children of God, dependent, fully dependent on God that we were meant to be. Just like little children are dependent on their parents and need Him to provide for all of their needs, for love, acceptance, for purpose in life, for meaning, for work to do, as well as for rest and enjoyment. All those needs that we have, every single one of them come from our source, God alone. So that is so primary. And I want to say that today, as we look at another identity, priests of God, it's something that comes out of being a child of God. It's only being a son or daughter that allows us then to step into these other identities. Being a priest, if we're going to be priests, and I'll describe what that means in a moment, we have to have first been God's children. We have to have been welcomed into His family. And who did that for us? The great high priest, Jesus. The book of Hebrews describes Jesus Himself as a priest because He has led us into God's presence, and He has led us into home, into family, so that we actually, being in God's presence means that we are His sons and daughters. So being a priest then is really about being someone who welcomes other people to God. In the Old Testament, if you look at what the priest's primary job was, it was to create a space in which there was holiness, a holy space, a space that was sacred and set apart from everything else, especially from everything else that was profane in the world. Profane just means that it was cut off from God, or it was twisted, or something about it was not was against God and rebellious against God, right? And so a sacred space is saying we're not going to let the profane in here. We're going to keep this space set apart because this is where we enter into relationship with God. And so how do you do that? Well, you have to cleanse yourself. You have to let go of sinful attachments, sinful passions. Peter talks about this in 1 Peter. He says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 23 through 24, he says you got to let go and put off things like envy and wrath. You got to put off the former passions of your ignorance. In chapter 2, verse 1, he says you have to put away slander and envy and hatred and malice, and you have to instead enter into God's presence where none of those things are allowed to exist, right? So that's what a priest is. It's someone who is able to help create that space that's set apart. That's what the word holy means. Holy means to be set apart, to be sanctified. And so I want to invite us to just consider then to step into our identity as priests. It remains, there's both a negative and a positive to it. There's a negative in that we have to put off certain behaviors, lifestyles, and identities in the world. Whether our identity is out of something like performance-based, or whether it's out of sexuality, something we find in sexuality that we think will give us life and joy and meaning and acceptance and all the good things we need. We have to put off identities that aren't from God, and instead, being a priest says, being a priest means that we help others just let go of that, and we ourselves let go of those identities and behaviors. But positively, being a priest means we welcome people into love and grace and forgiveness. In the Old Testament, the priests would not just make sacrifices for people. They would do that, but they would also teach people how to confess their sin, how to own their own wrongs, and how to seek forgiveness from God and from other people. The priests would teach them how to approach God and worship Him and love Him and know Him. The priests were the teachers as well as the worship leaders in the Old Testament. So the priestly identity we have then is the same. We're inviting people in a safe, sacred space where they can experience God's transforming power. And we can do that by being safe ourselves, because God is safe. And what does that mean? Safety can sometimes mean to people that we don't have any beliefs, any values. We're just neutral. But that's not safety. Safety means we do stand for something. but we stand for it in a way that's full of gentleness and respect, as Peter says. Gentleness and respect. If somebody asks you for the reason of the hope that's in you, you respond in gentleness and respect. That's being a safe person. It's looking at others and wanting their good, not just wanting to win them or conquer them. So that's safety. And then the sacred part is inviting them into God's presence. If we're doing that, we're saying, yes, you do need to let go of your other attachments, your other identities, and you need to embrace what God really wants and has for you. And so there's a risk to that when we invite people into sacred space, because God does transformative things in people's lives that can hurt. Right? Jesus, if we're going to follow Jesus, apprentice ourselves to Jesus, well, that means living the way he did, which was to abandon his will to the Father. And so we are priests then in those ways, creating safe sacred space for people. Finally, let me just say, though, again, being a priest is something we can grow in, right? It's something we can mature in. And so I want to provide some resources for us to do that on the bottom of this page. And I want to also emphasize, though, that we're already priests. You don't have to be perfect. I'm certainly not a perfect priest myself, and God does not expect us to be perfect priests. All right, that's Jesus. He's the great high priest. But in him, we are priests. We already are, and we can grow and mature in how we live that out. Thanks so much. Bless you.